Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, Assalamu alaikum. Today we are going to study the concept of design rules. As you know that whenever we design a software, we have some goal in our mind that our software must be usable. That means it must provide all the requirements of the user and user must enjoy using that software. So that this is usability. So we have different rules to design a software so that it must be usable. Let's start with it. We require design rules, which are rules a designer can follow in order to increase the usability of the eventual software product. That means if a designer is going to design a software, then there must be some design rules. When he follows these rules, he can design a software that has the maximum usability. That is, it performs all the actions required by the user. It done every activity that is required by the user, and user enjoys using this software. So this is the concept of usability, and a designer can design a usable product, a usable software with the help of the design rules. So we can we can divide these rules along with two dimensions. One is the authority and other one is the generality. In fact, by authority we mean an indication of whether or not the rule must be followed in design or whether it is only suggested. So that means it is only a suggestion or we must use it. So if I say that it is just a suggestion, if you want to use it you can use it, and if you do not want to use it you may forget it. So that means that rule is low in authority. It has nothing compelling you to use it. So we can divide something that is authoritative and that is low in authority. I give you the example of low authority. Now let's talk about the high in authority. When we talk about the standards, in fact, if I am developing a software that must be as per some standard, so I will have to follow the rules. I will have to follow the standard. So the standards are in fact more authoritative in nature. We have to follow those. So now if I read it out again, you will find by authority we mean an indication of whether or not the rule must be followed in design or whether it is only suggestion. So if I say that it is just a guideline, then it is low in authority. When I say that it is a standard, then it is high in authority and you will have to use that rule or that principle. Second point is generality. We mean whether the rule can be applied to many design situations. That is, it is more general, it is generic. It can be, for example, if I say a word, a simple rule that your software must be user friendly. So it is a very general term. It can be applied on the mobile app, it can be applied on the web interface, it can be applied on the desktop application, everywhere. So it is more generic. So by generality mean whether the rule can be applied to many design situations or whether it is focused on a more limited application situation. So in fact normally there can be rules, those are general, and there can be standards that are specific. For example, if I say that I am developing a banking software, there is some specific area, some specific product line, so I will have some not general but specific guidelines, specific standards, specific rules for that. So now we can understand the rules can be on the basis of authority and generality. We can divide them and then we can say that this is a standard, this is a principle, and this is a guideline. So now let's check principles first. Principles are abstract design rules, so there are not much detail in them, but in fact these are some design rules that guide us how to do something, and these principles are low in authority. That means we are not compelled to apply them. If we want to, we can, and if we do not want to, so we can leave those. And now the third thing is high in generality. That means it is more generalized, generic. So principles are more generalized or generic. They have low authority and they have abstract design rules, not detail. So principles can be used and cannot be used because authority is low, not high. So it is up to us. If we think that these are good for us, these principles are good for us, we can apply those, we can implement those. And if we feel it is not helping us much, then we can leave those. Then comes the standards. Standards are specific design rules because these are for specific areas, specific problems, specific domain. So each standard is for some specific problem. So these are specific design rules, and these are high in authority. As I told you, standards are always high in authority. Why? Because if I'll have to make some software as per standard, then I must follow the standards. If I am not following the standards, then my software will not be as per the standard level. So that is why it says the standards are high in authority. They demand that we must apply those. And then each standard is for some specific task, some specific area. So limited application. We have different, for example, standards for the mobile application, different standards for the web applications, different standards for the desktop application. So it depends upon the technology, it depends upon the problem, it depends upon the solution, that we have different standards, and each standard is for some specific area or application. So the principles low in authority, standards high in authority. Now let's come towards the guideline. Somebody is guiding me, giving me some advice. So now these are again lower in authority. There is nobody is asking me to implement those. But again I'll say that in fact when we have nothing to follow, the guidelines and principles help us to design something better. So lower in authority, and guidelines are normally more general applications. For example, if I say that your fonts must be readable, your theme of the interface must be pleasant, so these are generic guidelines, more general. So when I think about the principles, I can apply or not. Standards high authority. If I want my software to be standardized, I must follow those. Guidelines again low authority. When we look at this diagram, we find that on the x-axis we have increasing authority. That means we are following the standards, and when we follow the standard, it says you will have to do this. So increasing authority. And on the y-axis we have guidelines, suggestions, and in fact those are more general. So it says that guidelines helps us to design, and standards help us to design something as per standard. So we will have to take the help of guideline and standards and try to find a path like this, some balanced path in which we are using the standards and the guidelines both. We must not leave any of them, so that we must get a result, we must get a product or a software that is according to the standard and that has all the guidelines implemented that were required to design it well. So in this manner, when we work on this diagram, or according to this diagram, in fact we can design in a better manner a standardized product with the better guidelines. So if I talk about the usability, as I told you, our main goal of interaction design is the usability. That is, my software must perform everything, must do everything that is required by that software, that is required by that user of that software. So in fact this is my requirement, and for this I can use the principles of usability that I told you. Those are low in authority, but those are helpful for while designing. And we can also use the standards and guidelines. As I told you, standards have the high authority, so we can use the principles and standards and guidelines to develop or design a software that has the better usability, that provides us the better functionality, every functionality that is required by the user in a better manner. And the third point is design patterns. Normally in an application there can be patterns, there can be functionality that reoccurs. For example, if I'm developing two softwares and the same functionality is being used in the other software, then what will I do? I will reuse that design knowledge. In fact, that is what it says, that try to find out the patterns and then capture those patterns and reuse that design knowledge, so that you must not reinvent the wheel. If you are going to do something that has been done before, or that has been done in the same application before, you need not to make it from the scratch. You have that design and you can reuse that design to just save your time and effort. And the same diagram now, it suggests us that the design rules suggest how to increase usability, differ in generality and authority. So we have studied that when we use the standards, we are towards increasing authority, and when we are more towards the guidelines, we are going to make it more general. So we have to find out a balanced way in which standards and guidelines are used in such a manner that we make a better and usable software. So now, who gives us the standards? Normally, it is not like me and you who can give the standards. In fact, these standards are set by national or international bodies to ensure compliance by a large community of designers. So, these are the national or international recognized bodies. Those give us the standards, and the designers and the programmers and the practitioners, those follow them, right? So that is why I said I cannot give that standard. Some group of users cannot. These are the in fact uh, j- bodies. These are the, in fact, the platforms, the research communities that are developing these standards by studying. And when they are studying different aspects, for example, in terms of HCI, the standards require sound underlying theory and slowly changing technology. That is what is required. In fact, the persons who are working on the standards, they must have the underlying theory knowledge. They must know about it. For example, when we talk about the HCI, the underlying theories can be the physiology, ergonomics, human factors, that how a person sits, how he uses the LCD, LED, the old, for example, I call those the cathode ray tube, CRTs, right? So we have different technologies, we have different concepts of using those. So we have different underlying theories that are studied, and on the basis of those, they develop the standard. Because in fact, this is not only the software standards, these are the hardware standards as well. What kind of keyboard we are going to use, how my user is going to enter the data, how I am going to use a touch screen, how I am going to use an ATM machine. So in fact, these are the theories that help us to understand how a user decides, how he acts, how he works. So these are something that must be known to these communities. And again, it talked about the slowly changing technologies. Normally, hardware does not change so often, right? So that is why the software changes much. So it says that less changes in hardware as compared to the software, and this is the reason that hardware standards are more common than the software, right? That means there are more standards for the hardware, for keyboards, for mouse, even from a nut and the, for example, some screw. Everywhere there are standards, their size, their length, everything. So that means, in fact, the hardware has got more detail and more authority in it as compared to the software. But again, the book talks about the ISO 9241, and it says that this defines usability, as we are studying the usability, as effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction with which users accomplish a task. That means that we are talking about a user must feel that whatever he is doing, it will be, that software will be usable if the task is done in an effective manner, in an efficient manner, and user is satisfied. So this is something, a standard given to me for some specific software property, that is usability. Now I must know that what is this effectiveness, efficiency, satisfaction. So now check. One component of ISO standard 9241 that we have studied already, right, pertaining to the usability specification applies equally to both hardware and software design. In the beginning of that document, the following definition of usability is given: the effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction with which specified users achieve specified goals in particular environment. So now the question about the effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction. Now it describes the effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction. So the accuracy and completeness with which specified user can achieve specified goals in particular environment. So it is effectiveness. What is efficiency then? The resources expended in relation to the accuracy and completeness of goals achieved. This is efficiency. Then what is the satisfaction? The comfort and acceptability of the work system to its users and other people affected by its use. So in fact these are the definitions, and when we develop the software standards, we make the matrix, we make the tables, we put every value in those, what is required for what standard, and then we define the standards and we follow those standards. As compared to the standards that are more in authority, we studied or we talked about the guidelines. In fact, normally it happens that sometime our studies, our designs, our theories are not complete. So if those are not complete, they can never become a standard. So the book says incompleteness of theories underlying the design of interactive software makes it difficult to produce authoritative and specific standards. So if my theory is not complete, it is not proven, so I cannot call it a standard. It cannot be an authority in that area. So what happens then? As a result, the majority of design rules for interactive systems are suggestive and more general guidelines. So they never become some standard, some high authority rules. They just are the standard. Sorry, these are just the suggestions and the guidelines that provide us the help to do something, but those are not the standards in fact. So there is the guideline that guides us, that helps us, that advises us. So many textbooks and reports full of guidelines. There are many books. You will find every book with the principles, with the guidelines, right? Similarly, abstract guidelines are there and the detailed guidelines are there. For the early life cycle development, we have many abstract guidelines, the very basic principles, right? But for the detailed guidelines, when we talk about the details, in fact the later stages of the software development life cycle, then we have the style guides, we have the detailed guidelines. So we have multiple guidelines that we can use during our software design and development process. Understanding justification for guidelines aids in resolving conflicts. We must understand what is the purpose of a guideline, right? What is the justification for a guideline? So whenever we are confused or we are not able to decide, then we can remove our confusion with the help of that particular guideline and the justification of that this guideline is saying this and it is saying this because of this. So when we will understand everything, those conflicts, those confusion will be removed. So where we have many rules and the heuristics, and it normally says that in fact these rules are the broad brush design rules. That means these are not applicable to every specific situation, but these are the general checklist. There is useful checklist for good design. If I have 7, for example, rules or 7 heuristics or 7 principles, whatever, so it says that maybe it will not apply to every aspect, but you have 7 points to check whether your design is following them or not. If your design is following those points, that means your design is at least following some guidelines, some rules, some heuristics. So it is better that you must use those. So again, broad brush design rules, not applicable to every specific situation, but these are helpful as a useful checklist for good design. Second, better design using these than using nothing. If you are not following any rule, then it is better that you must use any of the rules that we will study soon, that we are going to study. So we must better use this or this or this or two of them, or anything, so that we are not saying that I used nothing. No, I used something that was given by some scientist, some computer scientist, some HCI engineer. So I have used those, and that is why I can say that my design can be a better design. So this is about the principles, rules, uh, guidelines, and for example, what I said, I just forgot the word. In fact, the standards. So in fact, these are few things that we studied about: the standards, guidelines, principles, rules, how authoritative which one is, and how we can use all those to get a better design of a usable software. So in the next class, we'll talk about the Schneiderman 8 golden rules, Norman 7 principles, and Nielsen's 10 heuristics in the next class. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi.